In this episode, I'm talking with my guest, Dr. Glenn Livingston. He's a PhD psychologist, and he has a new book out. It's called Defeat Your Cravings. He's an expert in binge eating and food cravings. And if you've ever struggled with food cravings yourself, or you wondered why you have trouble making lasting changes to the way you eat, stick around. This episode's for you. Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where it's all about maximizing your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, naturopathic doctor and biblical health coach, and this is episode number 123. Today we have back on the show Dr. Glenn Livingston. Dr. Glenn is a veteran psychologist and longtime CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, which has serviced several Fortune 500 clients in the food industry. Dr. Glenn's work has been published in major periodicals like the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Chicago Sun-Times, and more. Disillusioned by what traditional psychology had to offer overweight and/or food-obsessed individuals, Dr. Livingston spent several decades researching the nature of binging and overeating. Most important, however, was his own personal journey out of obesity and food prison to a normal, healthy weight and a much more lighthearted relationship with food. His most recent book is Defeat Your Cravings, The Back Door to Weight Loss, and I can't wait to hear about it. Dr. Glenn, welcome back to Natural Health Matters.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to see you again. I really look forward to this conversation. You are only the second guest I've had on the show as a repeat, so that says something about the quality of your interview.
Thank you. I'll try to live up to that.
Well, I want to ask you a question real quick. I usually start off a little differently, but the title of your book is so intriguing to me, Defeat Your Cravings. There's got to be somebody saying, well, aren't cravings natural? Can they really ever be completely defeated? What would you say to that?
They are natural. And, in primitive times, we had to be really good at finding food sources. And so people that had stronger cravings would have the motivation to associate, food signals with a source of nutrition and calories. And so I always say that the stronger your cravings are, the healthier your brain is functioning. It's not a sign of a sick mind or a mysterious disease. Cravings are a sign of a healthy brain for the most part. It's just that in our current environment, they're attached to the wrong thing. We live in a world of hyperpalatable bags and boxes and containers that hit the bliss point on a reptilian brain without giving us nutrition to feel satisfied. So the shorter answer to your question would be that they can be labeled dormant. They never really go away, but they can be labeled dormant. So if you stop for pizza every time that you pass a pizza place on your way home, what's happened is that the pizza place is serving as a food signal that stimulates the craving and motivates you to go in and get the pizza food.
Right.
If you decide you're overdoing it and you decide you're not going to stop, and I know that's easier said than done, so that we'll talk about a number of ways you can do that. Over the course of, 25 to 35 passes, going past the sign and not doing that, your brain starts to say, well, I guess that pizza place and the sign and the smell used to serve as an effective signal for the availability of pizza, but it doesn't really work anymore. I don't seem to get those calories and nutrition when I pass that sign. Therefore, I don't want to keep wasting energy on pursuing that pizza place. I'm going to label that craving as dormant. And so over the course of, let's say a month and a half, if you don't stop at that pizza place, it eventually won't bother you. Your reptilian brain, your inner food demon, whatever you want to call it. I know that I called it my pig in my earlier incarnations.
I like that term. I think it actually communicates the point very well.
Thank you. Well, your pig will tell you that you're going to be tortured by pizza cravings forever, but that's not true. If you decouple the reward from the craving, at some point, the craving doesn't bother you anymore. Now, you could reactivate it in an instant. That's the thing that really trips people up. They don't really understand the process, and so they think there's something wrong and that they must have, they must not be doing it right. But no, your brain is doing it right. Your brain has spent a lifetime learning where to acquire calories. And so if you reignite that as a successful route to acquiring pizza, then you're going to get cravings when you pass the pizza place again. But
Right.
yeah, you can label them dormant. You can't really eradicate
So
them.
if I'm hearing you right, it sounds to me like your methods and what you teach people to do is it puts them back in the driver's seat. Instead of being in the back seat and having the driver up front, the inner pig or whatever you want to call it, in charge, you're the one in charge.
Exactly.
And you can get out of the front seat, get out of the driver's seat and hand it back to him if you want to, but that wouldn't be productive. So yeah, I get that. It makes good sense to me.
Yeah, but with an understanding of the way that cravings are formed and eventually extinguished or labeled dormant, with an understanding of what's going on in the culture and what type of defense you need to erect in order to navigate it, with some dedication to caring for yourself in the right way when you've decided to go through the extinction process, and with some very strategic forethought with regards to what particular cravings you want to extinguish and how to avoid forming new ones that you don't want, then you can have a radically different relationship with food in 30 to 60 days if you want to.
That's fantastic. So, yeah, I think I'd like to talk a little bit about the culture and what's going on in our culture and in the food industry, because you're an expert. You've been on the inside. You know what's going on.
Yeah, I don't do that anymore, by the way.
I should have said that wrong, actually. But you do have experience in there, so you have an insider's perspective. And so, what's going on there that really causes us to get a little lopsided in our relationship with food? So what's going on there with the food industry culture that's causing this so lopsided relationship with food for so many people?
You know, I once heard the comedian Louis Black said that he knew that we were reaching the end of the world when he walked out of a Starbucks and across the street was another Starbucks. I think you could say that equally for McDonald's or Burger King or a variety of other fast food establishments. Mm-hmm. We evolved in an environment where food was relatively scarce. We had to be very good at locating it. And that's what cravings are all about. It's identifying signals that can lead us to food sources. Mm-hmm. And our brains were not prepared for the incredible stimulation that we experience in today's environment. So we're stimulated by the concoctions that big food is engineering, these hyperpalatable concentrations of starch and sugar and excitotoxins and salt that really hit those evolutionary buttons that say, you know, this is a prime directive. This is necessary for our survival. And here is the availability of calories and micronutrients that you're not going to find elsewhere. You have to make this a priority. So there are more calories in a smaller space for less effort than there ever were in the history of our human species on the planet.
Sure, yeah.
There is also more stimulation of the signals of those calories. So, for example, it would be rare in nature that we would come across a multicolored, vibrant patch of vegetables and berries and fruit, right? We'd usually come across one or maybe two at a time. Maybe you'd find some bananas and blueberries if you were lucky. But to be able to eat the rainbow, we're programmed to want to eat the rainbow because the rainbow is indicative of a diversity of micronutrients that are available. That's why we want to have the rainbow every time we have a big salad.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. And you can speak to that more than I can, I'm sure. Yet the packaging industry can present those signals to us as if they were available all the time. So when you look at the packaging on most candy bars, you will see a variety of bright mixed colors that you might not see in nature. Right. It's supposed to signal the availability of nutrients, but those nutrients are not in the bar. All you're going to get are the calories. Mm-hmm. And so your brain says, whoa, this is effed up, right? Excuse my language, but this is messed up. I was expecting to find all these micronutrients. I was expecting to find, guar and pectin and all of the natural fibers you might find in fruit and vegetables. But all I got was calories. What's going on? I really want it because I want the calories. And so that gets us. And then the advertising industry knows how to kind of get in underneath your sales defenses. Everybody thinks that it doesn't affect them, but it actually affects you more when you think that, because you lower your sales resistance. And then we live in an overstimulated world where we're required to make many more important decisions over the course of the day than we would have had to make when we were hunting and gathering. So the reason that's important is that willpower is the ability to make good decisions, and there are only so many good ones you can make each day. It's kind of like you get a tank full in the morning and they wear down as you go through the day making decisions, not just food decisions about who takes Jenny to soccer practice and which car are we going to drive and what suit should I wear, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So we live in this overstimulated world where there are way too many decisions to make. We don't get enough rest. Then we're undernourished because our calorie sources have shifted from what nature has to offer to what these bags and boxes and containers have to offer. And it's really, we don't get enough sleep. We don't get enough water. We don't get enough exercise. It's a perfect storm that leads the brain into a kind of panic state. And when the brain is panicked that it doesn't have what it needs, it wants to force you to be less discriminating about food. If you don't really believe, like not just cognitively, but on a gut level in the body, if you don't really know that you have what you need right now, then your brain is like, we got to binge or we're not going to survive. We got to get calories. Get me calories. Get me calories. Get me calories.
Right.
And your judgment goes out the window.
It's like a pre-panic state, kind of. And you lose your judgment. I just want to back up just a minute. And you said something earlier is really interesting about decision making. So we make a lot of decisions throughout the day. And you said in the last interview we had that it's easier to make good food choices in the morning than it is in the late afternoon or evening, because we've been worn out making decisions all day long. So, one of the things I'm thinking about there is when you go to buy a car, you make an offer, and then the sales guy says, well, I have to bounce that off my manager. So he goes in the back and you see them having a cup of coffee, joking around. They're not working on your case. They are just dragging the process out to wear you down. And after you've been there for a couple of hours and they're just at work, but you want to get this car deal done, they wear you out, and you're much more likely to do whatever they say because you're just so worn out with the process, and that's part of their technique. So I think that kind of relates here. We kind of get worn out with all these decisions we got to make, and we're trying to make good choices. We want to make good choices, but our physiology says no.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that makes sense.
And one little tip in those regards, by the way, is that if you're struggling with overeating at night, if you make your food decisions in the morning and put out your dinner in a little Tupperware and all you need to do is stick it in the microwave when you get home, then you're much more likely to do better at night than if you wait until you're really exhausted to figure out what you're going to have for dinner.
Yeah.
Planning. We just think better about those kind of things.
Yes. Yeah. You make it easier when you haven't done any planning and your stomach starts to talk to you. Oh, you're reaching for anything you can, right? Because you just want to satisfy that urge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So a little planning will go a long way.
So that's actually kind of goes to how the new book developed, because originally I recovered by kind of thinking myself thin. I would identify the irrational thoughts that suggested I should break these rules that I made, like I'll only ever have chocolate on the weekend. I would identify those thoughts. It'll be just as easy to start tomorrow. You worked out hard enough, whatever. Mm-hmm. And I would argue with them and I'd say, the principle of neuroplasticity says that if you think I'll just start tomorrow, and then you reward it with some chocolate, for example, that you're going to be more likely to think, I'll just start tomorrow. And so you can really only ever use the present moment to be healthy. And those types of arguments would disempower those thoughts. It kind of took away the justification, and it would make me like more psychologically uncomfortable to indulge than I had been. And that's largely how I recovered on my own. Before I worked with 2,000 clients and had 1 million readers, that's largely what I did. I would argue with all of these crazy thoughts that would convince me to break my own rules. And slowly but surely, I identified rules that were easier to follow. And, over time, that cravings extinction process took hold, and I'm no longer really bothered by chocolate cravings or really any other major cravings.
That's fantastic. Praise God for that. But I got to believe that someone listening right now, someone in Natural Nation is saying, okay, so it took this guy years to figure it out. I don't want to take years. How can this guy put me on the fast track? What are your recommendations? Well,
I mean, we get an 89% reduction in overeating in the first month with that when we measure our success.
I'd call that the fast track.
Yeah. So I mean, we worked really hard on a variety of methods to figure this out. So, I mean, the first thing is to understand the technique for thinking, for kind of correcting your thinking, which is just to make a rule. I'll only ever have chocolate on the weekend, whatever rule you want to make, but it's got to be clear. And then define all of your constructive thoughts as those thoughts that encourage you to keep to the plan, and your destructive thoughts encourage you to break it. I call the thoughts that encourage me to break it my inner pig or my inner food demon. Mm-hmm. And that way you wake up more easily and can argue with those thoughts, and you put it in writing. We've learned a wide variety of things over the last 8 years working with about 2,000 clients that make the process faster and easier. And it mostly has to do with attacking the screw it, just do it response. Because what I found was that the limits of refutation, the limits of logical argument, were that when the brain perceived there to be some type of a emergency or a panic state, that logical thinking went out the window. So it didn't matter how, and that's what stretched out the timeline. And so when you attended to things like breathing, if you breathe in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11, when you first experience the urge, you're going to find yourself calmer and more able to use your rational thinking. See, if you breathe out for longer than you breathe in, you're signaling your brain there's no emergency. If you were running from a hungry bear, you'd be... So taking the time to breathe out for longer is one way of getting out of that emergency response system, the sympathetic nervous system, and into the part of the nervous system that says it's okay to digest and rest and strategize and plan.
Wow, that's really interesting. I have never heard anyone say that before, because there's a lot of talk about, parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. We want to be in the rest and digest side. That's where we do our restoration, our healing and repair. But by breathing longer, exhaling longer than you inhale, you're telling your body, it's okay. We're safe. We're not running from the lion at this moment. I like that. That's really great insight.
No, it's really powerful.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. The other thing would be right up your alley, which is nutrition. If you're regularly and reliably nutrifying yourself, your brain is less likely to perceive an urgent need for a rich source of calories.
Right.
And so, I know that intermittent fasting is all the rage, and I'm not really disputing the medical benefits of it, although I think there's some people who might, but I don't. But I tell people that it actually does, when you're trying to extinguish difficult cravings, that's actually an obstacle. What you want to do is have regular, reliable meals throughout the day so that your hunger is never really too strong, at least for like 4 to 6 months. Once you're really through the worst of your cravings, then you can start to reintroduce intermittent fasting or fasting into the process. But my success rate is about half for people that really want to intermittent fast right out of the gate. So
Okay.
I'm not against it. I work with people with it, but it makes it harder.
That makes sense to me too, Glenn. And I mentioned this on the last conversation we had, is that if you do an extended fast, not an intermittent, but, extended 24, 48, even 72-hour fast, your body starts to crave good nutrition. You won't be seeking out the bag of potato chips. You'll be seeking out a sirloin steak, or something, more substantial that's going to be packed full of nutrients. But I hear you, and I completely agree with you. And that is, when somebody's first starting out, you got to walk before you can run.
Yeah.
And throwing what could be a very challenging lifestyle choice, intermittent fasting, into the mix with all these other recommendations, people can get overwhelmed. And if you get overwhelmed, you're gonna throw up your hands and say, "This is impossible. I can't do it." And you're gonna have the relapse, right? And you're gonna go back into the old habit patterns that are comfortable. So when you're trying to learn something new, a step at a time is absolutely the way to go. Baby steps, in fact.
Yeah. But then you can kind of run the gamut of all the other things that we can do to take care of ourselves, like attending to drinking enough water, and getting enough sleep, and having enough social connection.
Mm-hmm.
We're social animals, and there tends to be a sense of panic when we're too isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, working on your finances can make a difference. A lot of people like to ignore their finances, and there's an underlying sense of panic that builds,
right?
Especially in the economy with the level of inflation and everything that we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And finding someone and actually working with your finances so that you're calm and you feel like you have a plan, it's under control, there aren't these bills mounting, or if they are, that you have a plan and they're organized and you have a way to address them. That makes a difference also.
Mm-hmm.
Like anything that you can do, yoga, getting more time outside, getting a little bit of sunshine,
Mm-hmm.
meditation. It's a lot of things that sound kind of hackneyed, and I wouldn't focus on these things exclusively. Like I think that there are systems of overcoming overeating which say that you need to focus on taking care of yourself exclusively, and then the eating will get back. That's not going to happen. You need like a very practical set of rules so that you know exactly where the bullseye is. You need a way to know when you've missed the bullseye. You need to know what to do when you have missed, so you can learn as much of it as you can.
Yeah.
And there's some very crisp science-backed things that you need to do in order to make that happen. But in order to implement that knowledge, it's really all about taking care of yourself and calming the reptilian brain to say, there's no emergency. I can actually sit and think right now and make a better decision.
Yeah, that sounds good. So what I hear you saying here is, I'm going to paraphrase, correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to stack the deck in your favor. There are a few key things that you're really going to have to implement, but the more lifestyle factors that you can implement that would come alongside and cooperate with your desire to get in control of your eating and eat better, the better. The more you can support that overall goal with all these small choices here and there, the better. Is that right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
So what else about the book would you like to share? I know you have 4 categories of rules for eating.
Oh, yes, that's from the original system. And so when we tell people that they should consider making a set of rules for themselves, first of all, I say to start with one simple rule,
Mm-hmm.
because you got to go to kindergarten before you go to college.
Right.
And most people are strangers to making very specific rules because our culture says that you shouldn't do that. They think it's going to stimulate your inner rebel. And we can get into why I'm not worried about that. But you want to start with something really simple so that you can make a difference and learn how to play the game without necessarily losing a million pounds immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll always put my fork down between bites, or I won't go back for seconds, or, I'll only have pretzels at a Major League Baseball park, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but once you have that, there's more you need to understand about how the extinction curve works, because most people think, let's go back to the example of passing a pizza place on the way home and getting this horrible craving for pizza and developing an overeating pizza habit. Mm-hmm. Most people think that if you stop eating pizza, you're going to be bothered by cravings tomorrow, and then a little less the next day, and a little less the next day, and a little less the next day. And it's going to be like walking down the side of the mountain. But that's not really how it works, because the brain doesn't want to give up that easily. What'll happen is there'll be a sharp dip the first or second day, and you'll say, oh, I've got this. I got this covered. And then all of a sudden the brain throws a tantrum, and it's worse than it's ever been, right? or at least as bad as it's ever been.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it makes sense, because in primitive times when food was scarce, if we had this routine that reliably led to calories and nutrition, the brain would not want to give up on that. So right. It's testing the waters. Maybe that pizza place used to be available all the time, and maybe it's only available once in a while now. That's what the brain is thinking. And so I have to test out once in a while to see if I can still get that before I give up on this, because it might be a lot more work to go and figure out another source of calories and nutrition. In the modern environment, it's not a lot more work, but that's what it was like back then. So there's this temper tantrum. It's called an extinction burst in the behavioral literature. And then it starts to go down slowly, but then the brain tries again, just a little less hard than it did the first time. And somewhere around 25 to 30 exposures, that's when you're really not bothered with cravings anymore. So the implication of that is you need to prepare for it. You can't think that there's something wrong with you or that it's not working when you get the temper tantrum, when you get the cravings temper tantrum. You just have to say, I can expect this. It's part of the extinction curve. I've decided to extinguish this pizza place as a signal for pizza. Therefore, I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to think I'm home free until I get those last couple of bumps somewhere around the 3 to 4 week mark. And then I know it's going to go steadily down from there. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing.
Okay.
The second is remembering that the craving can only be labeled dormant. It can't be eliminated. So I say, if you've broken out of prison, don't climb back over the wall to visit your friends. Just run in the other direction as far as you can.
Yeah.
So once you've extinguished a craving, leave it alone. Leave it alone. The third thing is to understand just how quickly these cravings associations can form. Because food was so scarce, when you found a particularly rich source of calories and nutrition, the brain learns exceptionally quickly. I had a friend about 30 years ago when I was in Overeaters Anonymous, maybe 25. And I can't give you his name because then it wouldn't be anonymous, right? And I don't use that program anymore. But I was having lunch with him, and he got a sandwich. It was on his plan, whatever. He got a sandwich, and he had a bite of it, and he said, "Oh, Glenn, I can't eat this. It's too good. And if it's too good, it's no good." And he put it down and ordered something else.
Wow.
And as I was studying cravings extinction in the last few years, I thought about that repeatedly. What was he doing? What did he figure out? He figured out that the moment that he has this orgasmic food experience, he has to ask himself, do I want that craving? Do I want that association? Or is this going to be dogging me and it's something I want to nip in the bud right now? And he decided to nip things in the bud because he knew how obsessed he was going to get about that sandwich if he kept eating it. So if it's too good, it's no good. So that's one implication about the way that cravings work, is that you can form them really easily. So be on the alert and don't let it form if you don't want the craving. You can, however, use that to your advantage, because see, the brain releases a lot of dopamine when there's an unexpectedly good experience with food. So it's not just a rich source of food and calories, but an unexpected or surprising source of food and calories, because that's when the brain says, there's this new opportunity here that I didn't know about. You can use that to your advantage if you, whatever dietary plan you're following. I personally do plant-based. My clients do all sorts of things. If you learn how to make about a dozen recipes and really rotate them so you're not getting used to any one, then you pretty regularly have that surprising experience, and you're going to get more pleasure out of each particular meal because your brain wasn't expecting it and getting used to it. So it tells you that it's worth putting in the effort to research surprisingly good things that will fit on your plan. I can make a flourless lasagna that would knock your socks off. And
I'll bet.
Yeah, I got about a dozen things that I can do to work that out. So,
well, going back to your buddy that said this is too good to eat. There's a lot there, really, and he knew his limits, right? So he was honoring that, and hats off to him for that. I respect that. But it also brings up the idea, this notion of counting calories, and I haven't heard you mention that. And personally, from my nutrition background, my training and my experience with clients and my personal experience says that counting calories for the most part is a waste of time. If you're focusing on good nutrient dense foods, they will satiate.
Yeah.
And we're satiated, you don't have a problem with cravings.
Right.
So therefore, in the body, I think the medical community takes a reductionist view to a human being because they've spent a lot of time in medical school studying cadavers, but not a whole lot of time studying actual human beings. And that is, our bodies are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. Our bodies if there's a craving, there's something going on. There's probably some kind of nutrient deficiency that your body is trying to meet. And you touched on that a moment ago about the packaging and whatnot that the food industry plays with. They understand this. And they're trying to maximize their profits at our expense. To hell with our health.
Right.
Right. So, I need to say this as well. And that is, if you're new to the show, I want to help you maximize your health potential so that you can look and feel your best at any age. And that's why I have experts like Glenn on that can really help us with that. But I believe strongly that we maximize our health potential when we align our lives more fully with God's natural design for spirit, mind, and body. And there's a verse that I'd like to share here. It's 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 12 and 13. It says, food for the stomach and stomach for food. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but I will not be mastered by anything. So we have some good advice here from our Creator, the one who designed our bodies. And he says, hey, don't let food master you. And I think that's really what you're talking about. You probably could have called your book Food Mastery.
I think it was Demosthenes that said, the brave man is he who not only masters his enemies, but not only conquers his enemies, but his pleasures. What I wanted to say in response to what you were saying is that, if you have 1,000 calories of pretzels, your body's still going to be hungry for nutrition.
That's right.
And you're going to want 1,000 calories of nutrition anyway.
Yep.
And so I think what you're saying is that when we eat what God has to offer or what nature has to offer us, that the body has a wisdom that it really knows what to do with it. That's why I always tell people, I don't think there was such a thing as an eating disorder 100,000 years ago. I don't think Thag was sitting around telling Marta, "Oi, ate too much mammoth or too many blueberries." I just don't think it happened. I think it's an artifact of
it's a modern invention. Yeah.
Tell me if I'm wrong about this. I think I read somewhere that a calorie is not a calorie is not a calorie. So if you have 1,000 calories of pasta versus 1,000 calories of fruit and vegetables, that the 1,000 calories of fruit and vegetables are more likely to be burned as heat, whereas the 1,000 calories of pasta is more likely to be stored. It's more available to be stored as fat.
Yes, I would agree with that, although the formula is much more complex than that. The important point to remember is it's not a simple – weight control is not a simple linear equation. It's not a straight line. It's a calories in versus calories out. If you're overweight, you've got to eat less and exercise more. Most people know by now that advice has failed us. It's failed a lot of people. And a calorie is a measure of how much energy is burned from that food. But again, our bodies are not test tubes. that, they're burning food in a Bunsen burner, and they're measuring how much heat it takes to burn that particular food. And it's absolutely correct to say a calorie from a pretzel is different from a calorie from an apple, is different from a calorie from broccoli, is different from a calorie of a grass-fed burger. They're different. They react differently in the bodies. And it's an extreme oversimplification of what our bodies do to take up nutrients, use them, and eliminate waste. To just call it a straight linear line, calories in, calories out, is all we have to worry about. It's just a drastic and a tragic oversimplification that doesn't work ultimately. Because if you're gonna starve yourself, eventually hunger will win the day. We could talk about techniques all day long, but your body will start screaming loud enough to where you won't be able to willpower and white knuckle your way through a healthy eating plan. You have to implement lifestyle choices that you can do for a lifetime, not temporarily.
What I find is that, first of all, I mean, there's a lot of argument about what the right way to eat is. And I kind of wish that people would stop arguing about whether it's, keto or carnivore or vegetarian or vegan or plant-based. And I wish they would just focus on eating more whole, natural foods.
Amen.
And, yeah. And I find that as people that I work with get better, they evolve towards that. Sometimes calorie counting is a mechanism that helps them feel in control as they're coming to these conclusions. What you have to watch out for with calorie counting in particular is that your pig wants to save calories for later. So it'll say, well, if I don't eat until 2:00, then I'm going to have 2,000 calories left for the rest of the day. I could have 1,000 calories of junk, and then maybe I'll have a real dinner. So I find that the more that people focus on calories, the more likely they are to include processed, unnatural white flour, sugar, salt, and those kind of things in their system. And that as they use the techniques that we teach them to either moderate or get a lot of the junk out of their system, then they find that they don't need the calorie counting the way that they thought that they did. So
yeah, that's a good word. Yeah, it's worth talking about, because any discussion on weight loss is going to be people that we've just heard this as dogma for so long, that this is the secret to weight loss: calories in versus calories out, and it just doesn't work. In fact, it sets you up for failure, because if you lose weight, you're going to be losing muscle mass along with that fat body weight. And when you gain it back, you're going to gain more fat than you will muscle. So you go through several cycles. Now you've set yourself up, because muscle burns calories in a static state much more efficiently than fat does. So you're just weakening your metabolic set point. You're lowering it, and you're making it harder and harder to maintain a healthy weight. So anyway, that's actually, I think, a topic for another podcast, really.
Okay.
But I think it's worth touching on that, because there's a lot of confusion out there. And again, if you're embracing a healthy lifestyle, eating food as close to its God-given natural form as possible, getting away from the processed food, if it comes in a box, a package, or a window, or through a window, it's suspect. Don't bother bringing your phone with you and Googling what the ingredients. If you can't pronounce it, you probably want to just put it back on the shelf.
Right. Yeah.
Eat natural food. Eat real food.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very good.
But this is why these are often insights that it's hard to give people. They kind of have to experience for themselves. And also because the way that the brain works is that the more concentrated sources of calories and flavor and excitotoxins that you have, the less the pleasure system responds to natural foods.
Right.
And so people feel like when you tell them, well, just stop counting calories and eat whole foods, like you've got to be crazy. I hate fruits and vegetables. Mm-hmm. But you won't hate fruits and vegetables down the road as you go through these techniques, as you go through this process, as you take better care of yourself. Your pleasure systems are going to upregulate and respond to the natural sugars in an apple or a salad, or You're going to get as much or more pleasure. And one of the ways that we know that is because there are studies where if you ask people what diet they recommend, It's whatever one they're on. If they're on any particular diet for 2 or 3 years, then they say that it tastes wonderful. They don't feel deprived. So the system is malleable. It can adapt to a low carb diet. It can adapt to a high carb diet. Right. Your pleasure system is malleable. So
yeah. I think you brought up another good point there, and that is fruit was supposed to be satisfy our sweet tooth, right? We are getting so accustomed to such intensely sweet prepackaged processed foods that fruit doesn't satisfy the way it should, because our receptor sites have been downregulated, right? So we need more and more sugar to get the dopamine hit that we're looking for,
right?
We're supposed to be able to eat a grapefruit or an apple and say, wow, that was really sweet. That satisfied me. I was just listening to a podcast this morning. It's Paul Saladino, MD. He's a medical doctor, and he used to be pure carnivore. Now he eats carbohydrates primarily in the form of honey, raw honey, and fruits and fruit juices. And he had a whole episode on how beneficial fruit juice can actually be. And I've believed for a long time that God put fruit on this earth to satisfy our sweet craving and provide essential nutrients. So when you go to the extremes and you start eliminating these God-given or nature-provided foods, you're kind of messing with our design. That's the way I see it. And I've felt that way for quite some time.
Yeah.
Glenn, there's another question I'd like to ask you before we wrap up. And that is, everybody, we're all human. We're all going to mess up once in a while, right? We're all going to give in. And maybe we should give in once in a while at the party. Your kid's having a birthday party. You're going to not have cake with your kid. Maybe we should, indulge once in a while. But when we do, we shouldn't be beating ourselves up, right? I mean, I'd like for you to speak to that a little bit.
Well, it's the phrase I use is to commit with perfection, but forgive yourself with dignity. If you want to constantly grow and learn, let's say you're an archer, you would aim at the target with perfection. You would define a really clear bullseye. You would see the arrow going into the bullseye before you let go of it. You'd be committed with your soul. This is what an Olympic archer would do. Mm-hmm. But then if you miss the target, you would just say, well, by how much, in what directions did I miss? What can I learn from that? What adjustments should I make? You'd forgive yourself with dignity and you move on. You wouldn't say, oh my God, I'm a pathetic archer. There's something wrong with me. I'm never going to get this. I should just give up and shoot the arrows into the audience, right? You don't say that.
Right.
Or if you put your hand down on a stove on a hot stove and you accidentally burn yourself, you don't say, I'm a pathetic hot stove toucher. I might as well put my whole hand down. The perseveration on guilt after a mistake is really just a pig's effort to get you to feel too weak to resist the next binge. Mm-hmm. So what's appropriate is to ask yourself, what evidence of success can I find? Did I have 5 cupcakes instead of 15? Did I binge for an hour instead of 5 days? Did I stop it at 5,000 calories instead of 30,000 calories? What evidence of success, and how did I do that? How can I emphasize that more? Mm-hmm. So you're not supposed to get really involved with beating yourself up. It doesn't serve a purpose. As a matter of fact, if there is only one thing that people remembered from today's call, that would be it. Just ask yourself what you did right. No matter what went wrong, ask yourself what you did right and how you can do better. And then you will gather evidence of success. You'll be directing your brain to gather evidence of success, and you'll form a success identity.
Love it.
You're not supposed to beat yourself up. No.
That's a really good word. We can wrap up on that. But I want to give you the opportunity to, I know you have a generous gift for the audience, and I want you to share, what you're doing online and the group coaching that you do and all that kind of thing. So just let the audience know. Okay.
Well, the book is called Defeat Your Cravings. You can find it at defeatyourcravings.com. And when you get there, if you click the big blue button, it says free reader bonuses, and sign up to get those. You will get a set of food plan starter templates. So regardless of your dietary philosophy, whether it's, whole foods or plant-based or ketogenic or point counting or calorie counting, God forbid.
Some people are not going to let go of that.
Some people won't let go. A lot of people don't in the beginning. Right. We have sample plans for all of those. I call them starter templates because I I'm not a medical doctor or dietitian, so your food plan is really up to you. But we've got a comprehensive set of food plan templates. I've got a bunch of audio recordings you can carry around with you to listen to if you happen to make a mistake or feel like you're going to. I have a set of full-length recorded coaching sessions so you can see how this process works in practice rather than just hearing me talk about it in the abstract, because you must be thinking, why does David have a doctor with a pig inside of him on the call? It's actually a very compassionate process, which takes people from feeling hopeless and despairing about food to feeling confident, enthusiastic in just one session. And a whole bunch more. It's all at defeatyourcravings.com, defeatyourcravings.com. Click the big blue button.
And if someone wants to get a hold of you directly, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, go through the site and use the contact form.
Okay.
There's a phone number there too.
All right. Very good.
Yeah.
Dr. Glenn, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
For more, go to the show notes page at davidsandstrom.com/123. There you can find an audio as well as a video version of the podcast. And I always put some type of a content upgrade on there. This episode, I think I'm going to put my ABCDE method for identifying and correcting unhealthy thinking patterns. It's a PDF download and it'll help you with the thought process we've been discussing in this episode. If you're finding value here, I sure would appreciate you telling a friend about it. The number one way someone finds out about a podcast is a friend tells them. So I sure would appreciate you letting them know about the show and sharing it with them. I'll bet they'll appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.